I wanted to first say that I really appreciate the remarks made by my colleagues, Senator Fazio and Senator Summers. They're certainly knowledgeable about these financial matters, and to hear them speak really does break down the reality of the situation that we face here in the state today. I was going to open my remarks by calling into question the notion of whether or not we are really facing an emergency and whether or not we should be here in emergency session doing emergency certified bills. And while that question still sticks with me, and I'm going to certainly make that argument where it's even more transparently untrue that we're in a emergency on some of the other bills, there was a legitimate question on this bill about whether or not we were in an emergency. And I know that a lot of my colleagues over the last week or so that this has been in the news have been kind of back and forth on whether or not this is a legitimate solution to what for many people is a real crisis that affects their daily lives. I'm going to start by saying more than anything, what I'd like people to do is just put a stake in the ground about this conversation right now so that we can go back to this point, some point in the future, and look at what is being said here, what is being claimed here, and what ultimately transpires as a result of it. Because I think if we all look back at this point some day down the road, we're going to realize that there was a lot more going on than what meets the eye. A frustration that I have, even just moments before walking in the chamber this morning, is hearing some of the commentary that is coming from other members of the House and Senate and their interpretations of what has transpired in the federal government and how that relates to the individual lawmakers and political parties that are engaged in this debate today. And I will tell you, it's a tremendous frustration because I do my absolute best to concentrate on policy when I stand up in this circle and not character assassinations or division by party. Folks in this room know that I will stand up for what I believe in, whether my party's voting for or against it. And that remains true today. But when you start to gaslight the public about people that are experiencing tremendous hardships, starvation, freezing to death, etc., and I'm not suggesting that those things are not real possibilities in the world. I'm just suggesting that trying to suggest that your political opponents are responsible for those things is beyond the pale. There's not a single person in this building who wants anyone to starve or freeze, and we are going to work for policies that would prevent that in every case. It's just a reality that we may not agree on what those policies are. I was having a private conversation with one of my colleagues the other day about this particular bill and how there are people in need of their SNAP benefits, for example, to make sure that they have food on the table. But then I brought up the other side of the equation, which is that I have other people back at home in my district that have never taken a nickel from the state of Connecticut or the federal government who also are having trouble putting food on the table. I brought up a gentleman that lives in Southington, Connecticut. He's a senior citizen. He's a veteran. He served in the military. He sacrificed the time in the military, the potential for loss of life and limb for the rest of us to preserve our country and our freedoms. But he's never taken a nickel from any government entity because he's got pride. He wants to provide for himself and his family. But now here he is. He's around 80 years old. And this is a gentleman who has to struggle every day to make decisions about whether or not he's going to pay his electric bill or his medication, whether or not he can afford to pay someone to repair his furnace or clean out the gutters of his house. And now this gentleman is in danger of losing his home because of tax liens, because his property taxes have risen so high and his ability to pay has not kept up with that. And frankly, without getting into the personal conversation I had with him, he's embarrassed. He's embarrassed about his own inability to take care of himself. And I think to myself, what a tremendous and remarkable way to look at the world compared to the fact that there are others that feel that they are entitled to everything and anything from others without ever putting the effort forward themselves to achieve it. We have got to get more. I don't know if I mentioned his name or not, and I'm not going to do that, but we need to get more people like my constituent in this state, because frankly, policies that hand out benefits without the proper amount of effort being put to create the wealth necessary to do so cannot last forever. And that's the battle between the political parties that still rages on. For me, when I was looking at this last week, I was thinking about a few things. The first thing I would say is that I was concerned that we were setting a bad precedent. You know, the federal government, Democrats and Republicans, just like here, are not going to get along all the time. And there are going to be stumbling blocks along the road. And sometimes things are going to go bad. And there's going to be future government shutdowns, and there are going to be failures of benefits to be applied and so forth. And the question is it our job as a state government, as a state legislature, to take the place of the federal government in a situation like that? And certainly, if it's a small thing and we have the resources to do so, maybe that's justifiable. But we're not talking about small numbers here. If this shutdown had continued for 6 months or a year, imagine the expense to the state of Connecticut taxpayers. If the federal government suddenly failed to deliver Social Security checks, are we going to step in and start asking Connecticut taxpayers to pay for Social Security too? At what point do we have to realize that we're only able to do what we can do as a state government, and that we should stay in our lane and let the policies that are being negotiated through whatever terms of warfare are going on in Washington, those things are going to happen. I think it's worth pointing out what happened in Washington, just for the sake of argument, by the way, because I will tell you that the most of the people that I run into on a day-to-day basis are completely uninformed about exactly what happened. The fact of the matter is there is a bipartisan requirement to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government open. That is a 60-vote requirement in Washington. The Republicans have a majority in both chambers and the presidency, but they don't have 60 votes. So that required some Democrats to cross over and join them in supporting the continuing resolution, which effectively is the document that ended the shutdown. So for the last several weeks that we've been in this shutdown and this crisis that has occurred in Connecticut and across the country, I really do believe that people need to look at those folks that were blocking that continuing resolution from occurring. And I'm trying not to cross a line here by casting any aspersions on any particular individuals or political party, but the fact of the matter is the Republicans have 53 representatives in the Senate. 51 of them voted for that resolution every time, and I think it was 13 or 14 times. They needed just a handful of Democrats to join them, and they refused to do so up until last night, frankly. So that is what caused the shutdown, and that is what's ended the shutdown finally. But now that this shutdown is over, I see very little need for this particular policy to go forward. I understand that the SNAP benefits provision has been provided for the next full year. So I don't know what we need this bill for, frankly. Looking at the bill, it's become much more clear what this was always about. This was not about finding a way to make up for the government shutdown, preventing people from getting important benefits. It was always more than that, because my understanding, this is the same bill that we would have voted on if the shutdown had continued or not. And if you start to look at the language of this bill, you start to realize things. In this bill, it actually says that this money can be used if there is either action or inaction by the federal government that results in a reduction in benefits. Frankly, that sounds like almost any circumstances. If it happens or it doesn't happen, we get to use the money. I don't even know why you bother even to make a statement like that. You just say that we're able to use the money. And then in the bill language itself, part of it's correct. It says specifically that this is about funding for the supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, and so forth. It says LIHEAP, low-income heating assistance program, but then it includes these extremely broad terms. Healthcare, just healthcare. So that means effectively that if there's a reduction in any healthcare funding by the federal government, now this $500 million that we're holding on to can be used to supplement that. It includes school meals, child care assistance, and housing assistance. So if you're listening to this, the message I want you to understand is that you've been sold a bill of goods, that we were going to come in here and vote as a backstop to the federal government. It's obvious today, now that the shutdown is over, that the SNAP funding's been secured for the next year, that we're still here, the majority still wants to pass this bill, that there's some other thing going on. And the other thing is that they want $500 million. And let me just stop for a second. There was a little conversation between Senators Fazio and Austin about how much $500 million is. But it is a tremendous amount of money when you consider the size and scope of the state government is around $25 or $26 billion per year. That is a huge number. $500 million. That means 500 lotto awards, for example. It is an unbelievable pile of money. It is not the kind of thing that you should leave up to the vote of a select few individuals, and that is exactly what this bill does. This bill basically says that if any lawmaker, a Democratic lawmaker in the House, for example, decided that they were unhappy with a shortfall that was created by the federal government, by the Republicans in charge, on the subject of health care, and last night it was confirmed that even funding to Planned Parenthood would count, they could just put that forward. And now what happens is it's up to the governor and the majority of the leaders in this building to decide whether or not they want to stop it. Not to enable it. It never comes back here to the full legislature. It never comes back to the Senate. It's going to be decided by 6 members, 4 of which are already part of the majority. And what's so remarkable about it is they rigged it so that even a tie goes to the runner. A 3-3 vote is not enough. You actually have to have 2 of the Democrat leaders switch to say no, and not just 1. It's pretty remarkable to me just how broadly the language has been written, and the purpose is now clear, that it is not about solving a crisis created by the shutdown. It is about providing a $500 million slush fund to the governor and the leadership of the majority party in this legislature to do whatever they want with, without the necessity of having to go through a vote through this legislative body. It's remarkable. I started this conversation by talking about whether or not we were in an emergency or not. And it occurred to me while I was thinking just before I picked up the microphone that, in fact, we are in an emergency in this state. The emergency is that 10% of our population is on SNAP to begin with. That's the emergency. That's a message that says whatever economic policy this state is using is failing the people that live here. And I can see that. I've voted against the majority of that economic policy since I've been here because I've seen just how big the amount of damage is that has been done to the hardworking people of this state, the people that are actually not on the receiving end of benefits from the government. I've seen how much harder it is for people in my own community, my own family, my parents, for example, to pay their bills because their medical bills keep rising. We have the 3rd highest electric bills in the entire country. There was a conversation a little while ago about whether or not we had a substantial amount of debt. We have the highest per capita debt of any state in the country. Our state has been mismanaged horribly. And what this bill does is it gives more authority to the same people who did that damage, in my opinion. And without even the voices of the majority of their caucus to be able to spend $500 million of taxpayer money. It's unacceptable, in my view, Mr. President. And as a result, I want to do something that actually would be effective in reversing the pain that the people of Connecticut are experiencing. The sadness of the fact that people do have difficulty paying their bills as Connecticut residents. I've got so many friends, by the way, that have moved away to other states. They call me to rub it in my face how low their property taxes are, how much they did not have to pay to their state income tax. I mean, this happens to me regularly. And so does to a lot of people, and that's why a lot of my friends moved away to begin with, and more will continue to. Stay tuned. We'll be talking about the exodus from Connecticut later when we take up the housing bill. But I think the best thing to do, Mr. President, after listening to the debate earlier and realizing that we have almost $4 billion of taxpayer money sitting in our rainy day fund, the best thing we could do to alleviate some of the pain that people have, to alleviate the fact that people are having trouble paying their bills, is to give them back a portion of their own money. So with that, Mr. President, I have an amendment. It is LCO 10926. I ask that the clerk call this amendment and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize.
Mr. Clerk.
I apologize. I did give you the wrong LCO number. I was reading off the bill. The LCO is 11034. Forgive me.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 11034, Senate Amendment A.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This amendment is very straightforward. It takes the same $500 million in question, a relatively small portion of the budget reserve fund. Some of the budget gurus in our caucus will tell me that some of it's actually in the rainy day fund and then some of it's in the pipeline. But either way, these are excess dollars that belong to the people of Connecticut that we have taxed as a state that have no destination. This money belongs back in the hands of those taxpayers, in my view. So this bill would take that $500,000 and return it back to taxpayers as a credit against their income tax in the future. We don't have an exact number for the amount per taxpayer, but it is somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 to $400 per person. And I think that would go a long way to offsetting a public benefits fund charge or any other bills that people are faced with in Connecticut. I move adoption, Mr. President, and I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Senator. Will you remark further? Senator Austin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm not certain that this is actually germane to the discussion that we have, but if the circle determines that this is germane, then I would ask for a roll call vote, and I would ask my colleagues to vote no on this amendment through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Austin. Will you remark further on the amendment? Senator Lesser, this is on the amendment.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. A question through you to the proponent of the amendment.
Yes, Senator Sampson.
Yes, through you, Mr. President. Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Through you, in the proponent of the amendment, just prior to bringing the amendment out, said, quote, that SNAP funding seems to be secure, or SNAP funding is secure for the next year. Is that the proponent believes that sincerely? Through you,
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. That is my understanding based on the votes that were taken in Congress yesterday evening.
Senator Lesser.
Yes, Mr. President, that's not my understanding. To best of my knowledge, the President is still in front of the United States Supreme Court seeking to overturn the lower court decision compelling him to fund the SNAP program. Remember, the court in Rhode Island had ruled that the President's actions defunding SNAP, depriving 360,000 Connecticut residents of the food that they need to survive, was illegal, was in a violation of the President's responsibility to faithfully carry out the laws of this country, something that had never happened in any previous shutdown. The President then appealed to the Second Circuit, to the First Circuit, then also appealed to the Supreme Court. And my understanding is that litigation is still pending. And the reason that's so important is because Governor Lamont led on this issue and said that Connecticut will backstop those funds. And thanks to the governor's leadership, funds for 360,000 residents were restored. Now, the President then sent a letter through the FNS, the Food and Nutrition Services Department of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, demanding that Connecticut recoup those funds, and Connecticut refused to do so. That issue, I believe, is still pending before the United States Supreme Court, unless that has changed. That is, things are rapidly evolving, but as far as I know, that case is still pending. And I would like the gentleman to let the circle know if we can have an assurance that the President has dropped his outrageous demand that Connecticut somehow be fiscally responsible for the President's refusal to carry out the laws of this nation. Through you.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The gentleman is mistaken. The court debate has to do with the contingency fund. The direct appropriation for SNAP has already been finalized. That was part of the debate and discussion and ultimate final vote last night.
Senator Lesser.
So you can assure the chamber, through you, Mr. President, that the President will not be pursuing any kind of punitive action against the state of Connecticut for Governor Lamont's decision to backstop SNAP benefits for 360,000 residents. Through you.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I don't think that the question is an appropriate question for the circle. Obviously, I'm not in direct contact with the President of the United States or have any say in his administration on what happens. I can tell you what Congress has done, and what that is that they have actually passed legislation for the direct appropriation of SNAP for the next year. That is the law of the land today. To be speculating about what might happen in the future, to suggest that somehow any one of us or this body might ultimately make a different law than what exists today is obvious. That can happen. Anything can happen. But what has actually occurred is what I'm relying on, which is that there was a commitment made by both parties yesterday, and Democrats in Congress joined Republicans finally to end the shutdown after a stalemate that has gone on for the last several weeks. And they did that for cause. And the cause was that SNAP benefits were going to be provided, and they were.
Senator Lesser.
I appreciate the gentleman's faith in Congress and in our leadership in Washington to do the right thing. But the fact of the matter remains that the President is currently in front of the U.S. Supreme Court right now, asking the Supreme Court to declare what Governor Lamont did illegal. And if that's the case, Connecticut could potentially be fiscally liable, and we would need the exact fund that we're creating under this bill. Additionally, I would say that these are not the only cuts to SNAP. The shutdown is a crisis. It's an emergency, but it's not the only emergency for food security for residents of this state. In H.R. 1, which Republicans in Congress and the President signed into law this July, there were hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts to the SNAP program. 40,000 Connecticut residents are currently set to lose their SNAP benefits, even with the shutdown coming to an end. Is that not an emergency? Through you to the proponent of the amendment.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I don't think the gentleman was listening while I was speaking, because I did express my concerns about the emergency situation in the state of Connecticut that all residents are facing, including people that are not on SNAP. The fact that 10% of our residents are receiving those types of benefits, that's the actual emergency created by bad fiscal policy from this majority. This is an opportunity to actually put money back in the hands of taxpayers. This amendment that is before us is a simple question. It is, do we give back $300 or $400 to people that were overtaxed? Yes or no? That is the only question on the table. Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Lesser.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer. I will just make it clear that while 360,000 residents lost their SNAP benefits due to the president's actions, they are now getting their benefits restored. 40,000 additional Connecticut residents are set to lose their benefits over the next year, thanks to H.R. 1. Those are folks who are veterans, or are single mothers, are refugees and immigrants, lawfully permanent residents of this state are going to lose their benefits in large numbers, residents of our poorest communities. To me, that seems like an emergency because there is no federal action to reverse that ill-considered, ill-advised action. And additionally, that's not the only issue, because remember, H.R. 1 passed after the legislature adjourned for the year, but it has all sorts of provisions in it, and I will focus just on food right now, but all of which seem like certainly emergent issues that we have to address. One of them is an unfunded mandate, just shifting the cost of administering the SNAP program onto the taxpayers of this state, $40 million a year, just because the federal government decided it didn't want to put the bill. That's one issue. And then another issue is a clock that started ticking on October 1st of this year to reduce our error rate in the program. That is, if we don't do that, that will fine the people of this state $140 million. $140 million that we will be fined by the federal government. And if we have to do that, that it will be a burden on the taxpayers of every town in this state. So what about those? I understand it would be great if we did not have folks who are poor in this state. I join the gentleman in agreeing that the fact that we have poor folks is a sign that we haven't done enough to build an economy that works for everyone. But there are a lot of poor folks in this state. And the federal government has changed the rules of the SNAP program in a meaningful way that seems to be creating emergencies all over the place. And so I'm just curious, what about either the reduction in the cost of the program, the shift in the cost of the running the program onto the taxpayers of the state, or the urgent need to reduce our error rate is not emergent? Through you.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. There were a lot of comments in there. It's hard to get to the gist of what the actual question is. But I can say that I appreciate the gentleman trying to engage in the same debate that is happening in the federal government in Congress about the benefits or negatives associated with various government programs. But that's not for our decision, and certainly not for our decision today at an emergency session of the legislature to discuss an emergency certified bill that was presented to the public and to the members of this state Senate as a solution to only the problem of the failure of the federal government to provide benefits as a result of the shutdown. We are all discovering right now that what the gentleman is saying is true, that this bill is not about that. This bill is about enabling the 6 leaders of this legislature to decide whether or not they disagree with federal policy enough so that they can burden Connecticut taxpayers with the cost of it. I disagree with that. But I appreciate the gentleman's concern, and what I recommend is that we go back into special session, that you create a policy, offer a bill that says that we are going to take up these responsibilities instead of the federal government. I encourage you to tell the constituents that you represent that you want them to experience such unbelievably significant levels of taxation they've never seen in their lives, because they will now also have to be taxed a second time for things they've already been taxed by the federal government for. That is not what we do here. And again, this amendment is very simple. You either believe we should give back taxpayer money that is sitting in the budget reserve fund to taxpayers who are struggling or not. I believe we should give them that money back. It's a simple yes or no vote. It's a 1.5-page bill. Imagine that. I don't know if we ever see those very often. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President.
Senator Lesser.
Yeah, we're just see this from slightly different perspectives. But when the president announced tax cuts this July, he did so in part with perhaps the greatest sleight of hand in American history, because what he did on SNAP, on Medicaid, on programs that benefit the residents of this state is shift the cost onto us. Now, folks in this circle are familiar with the term unfunded mandates. These are the biggest unfunded mandates in the history, not just of this country, but I suspect of any country. shifting the cost of programs that our citizens rely on, the most vulnerable people in the state, onto the taxpayers of the state. So who made that decision? It wasn't me. It wasn't anyone around this circle. But when you shift the cost of running the SNAP program onto states, those costs don't go away. In fact, we are required to run that program. But the question is, where does that money come from? And now that money comes from us. I wish that were the case. I would love that if that were not the case. But unfortunately, the folks down in Washington, the Republican leaders of the House and the Senate and the President of the United States, thought that tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the world were more important than the programs that benefit low-income seniors, families in Connecticut. I urge rejection of the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Lesser. Any other comment? Will you remark further on the amendment? On the amendment? If not, on the amendment. Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good to see you up there. I rise in support of the amendment.
Voting on the amendment. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate.
The machine will be locked.
Senate Amendment A, House Bill 8003. Total number voting 35, total voting yea 11, total voting nay 24. Absent not voting 1.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. The amendment fails. Any other?
Clerk.
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on House Bill 8003. This is now in the bill. We are voting on the bill. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate on House Bill 8003. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. Voting on the bill. House Bill 8003. Total number voted 35, total voting yea 27, total voting nay 8. Absent not voting 1.
Legislation passes.